In handling a camera, I feel that I have no peer. But what De Sica can do, I can't do. I ran his Shoeshine recently and the camera disappeared. The screen disappeared. It was just life. Those are words from director Orson Welles on Vittorio De Sica's 1946 film, Shoeshine. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia Moroni. And today we're talking about Shoeshine. So quick synopsis of the film is two shoeshine boys in post-war Rome, Italy, save up to buy a horse. But their involvement in dupes in a burglary lands them in juvenile prison. The experience takes a devastating toll on their friendship. The film stars Franco Interlenghi as Pasquale Maggi, Rinaldo Smordini as Giuseppe Filippucci, Agnello Mele as Raphael, Bruno Ortensi as Arcangeli, and Emilio Ciccoli as Tafera. It's written by Sergio Amedi, Aldolfo Franchi, Cesar Giulio Viola, and Cesar Zavatani. Cinematography by Anchisi Brizzi, directed by Vittorio De Sica, edited by Niccolo Lazzari, and music by Alessandro Cicognini. Today, my guest is Jason Christian, and he is one of the co-hosts of Cold War Cinema Podcast, which I definitely want to chat about because it's a very exciting concept. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much, Jason, for coming on today for the De Sica series.
Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Like I said, you're a co-host of one of the podcasts, or of a podcast called Cold War Cinema. And I'll let you get into that, but you focus on films from like the first few decades of the Cold War. Do you want to just chat about how that came about?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about starting a podcast just over the 1950s, and I started thinking because the 50s are kind of overlooked in cinema history, in my opinion. But I started thinking about what are the major themes that are important, what was going on in the world in the 50s, what were the issues being explored in cinema. And it all kind of, I'm a real big history buff. I love history, and it kind of gelled as, oh, well, this needs to be focused on how films intersect with the Cold War in one way or another, politically, culturally, and so on. Because the Cold War is also kind of overlooked. It's the defining global sort of situation, having its tentacles in every corner of the globe. And of course, it's thought of as being this series of conflicts between the U.S. and Soviet Union, but 100 countries were involved in one way or another, proxy wars and things. So movies are in conversation with all of that, whether they even know it or not. That's sort of how I got started. Our first season is all about every single film we've discussed was directed by a Hollywood blacklisted director. So, and there weren't that many. There are about, 10 directors who were blacklisted out of the 300 or so personnel. And so we've selected kind of one representative film to discuss, and we discuss the director, and we discuss their biography, and we discuss the cultural context and some of the themes of each film. But we're getting close to wrapping up season 1, and we're going to shift gears and start looking at Soviet cinema actually next season.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's been a fun project. I've learned a lot about film history and just history in general from doing this podcast.
Great. It's a great podcast. And
Thank you.
You've covered a lot of films that I personally love. And the first one you cover, The Lawless, is Joseph Losey, who's like one of my all-time, he's like top tier director for me. I love him. And, stuff like Night in the City, Body and Soul. But one that I was really excited to see on there with Quicksand. I love that movie. And I know it's like kind of disliked among people, but I think it's underrated. So I was very excited to see that being covered by a podcast.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely not talked about and not seen that often too. And we kind of give it a hard time, to be honest.
Yeah, most people do.
But it's worth watching for sure. And it's got some interesting moments.
No, that's cool. But, we're here to talk about a director who technically wasn't part of that era. Well, he did make films going into it, but not necessarily associated to the Cold War, but did make post-World War II films specifically. And we're talking about De Sica. Curious to hear what your relationship is to his work. Are you a fan? What would have been the first one you'd seen?
I am a fan. At the first, I mean, I hadn't seen that many of his films before recently, actually. But The Bicycle Thieves was the first one that I had seen,
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago and loved it.
Yeah.
It's iconic film. And I had watched it a couple of times over the years, but hadn't really seen much besides Shoeshine and that until recently. But I do love his stuff. And I would say he's really right in line with the kind of stuff we've been talking about, which is socially conscious films that are trying to shine a light on kind of the underclasses. And, that did happen in Hollywood, but it usually was done with a Hollywood touch. And De Sica doesn't have those restrictions. He can kind of go a little farther than Hollywood would go. And actually, in our very first episode of our podcast, we talk about that film by Losey and the Lawless. And he specifically cited over and over how much of a fan he was of Shoeshine in particular, this film. He said, we dream of doing this kind of film, but we can't do this kind of film. The Hollywood executives just won't let us go this far. So they, and there was a lot of intervention from the studio executives to kind of rein it in, to kind of put a more positive gloss on things, to give it a Hollywood ending. And I just liked De Sica because he's one of the founders, one of the most important people in Italian neorealism. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is a hopeful message or sentiment threaded through all of his movies, I would say. And not all social realism is like that. Some of it is super heavy-handed, like stuff that came later that was obviously influenced by De Sica. But like the Dardenne brothers, their stuff is super heavy-handed from Belgium. I don't know if you've seen their stuff.
No.
But it's good, but man, it's a whole different level of despair.
I gotta check that out.
Yeah, Rosetta would be a good place to start, I think.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, he's even got humor, which I like. It's subtly funny here and there. And I don't think that's an accident. I think he's trying to be subtly funny, sort of poking fun of our contradictions in society.
For sure.
So those are all things that I just love about De Sica. Just to start, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all those things. And I do like that you mentioned the undertones of humor that are sometimes more prevalent in other films like Miracle in Milan versus Shoeshine. But Shoeshine does have its moments too. I mean, his background is in comedy. He began as an actor, a comedic actor, before he was a director, and he still continued acting. He was literally nominated for an Oscar for acting. He's a great actor.
He is, yeah.
I do like that there is that sense of, there is levity in all of his films, no matter how sad they are. And like Shoeshine is a sad film, which we'll get into. But speaking of, I guess we can get into the first segment, which is their personal thoughts on the film itself, the story. Just to start off, I thought he's so tight with his stuff. He very rarely makes something over 90 minutes. And even if it is, it would merit every minute after. This is like an 87-minute film. And it doesn't feel like it's being shortchanged at all, but the pacing is so seamless. Like from the minute you're introduced to these boys, to all the other boys that you meet and the adults, you feel like you are settled in with them and you're so invested in what's going on up until the ending scene. It never feels rushed. I'm wondering how you feel about just the way he was able to pack in so much without it feeling under or overstuffed.
I agree. That's something I noted this time around watching it is flawless pacing. And I would say it's very innovative pacing. Like it's a really hard balance to find, to bring in multiple changes in scenery, multiple narratives, and keep it under 90 minutes. I agree. I think he's nailed it. I mean, this is a 5-star movie for me. Like this is a masterpiece. Underrated, in my opinion.
I think so too. It's not often that it gets spoken about when you hear the name De Sica, especially because something like Bicycle Thieves and even Umberto D are such powerhouses that usually are the
Mhm.
films that he gets associated with. But
Yeah.
Shoeshine is, I think it was the first film to win the, best foreign language film at the Oscars. Not that means anything, but it definitely meant something then,
Yeah.
more so than it means anything now. But it's definitely underrated. And we were kind of talking about earlier how there is a bit of levity in the stuff that he talks about or tackles, but they are all real life things, especially at the time. And he is talking about how it was for Italian people post war. And he often likes to portray children, which is not a topic a lot of people like to portray because it's touchy.
Hmm.
You're really going to be asking a lot from the audience. And especially this is a film about kids who are essentially in prison. It's a juvenile detention center, but it is their own little prison. That's a very interesting topic to tackle. Wondering how you feel about and we will definitely get into other things about how children in his films in the third segment, but just how it's tackled here in this film.
Yeah, that's something wanted to mention earlier. One thing I like about De Sica is he uses children as a subject often in many films. And I love how much of this film, there are no adults around. Children are in their own little world. And if you can observe children talking to each other without the gaze of the adult, it's different, right? And so we get that kind of observational insight into the children's imagination, their values, their dreams, and all that for quite a bit of the film. And so, like, these boys commit a pretty petty crime, selling 2 stolen blankets on the black market, post-war when the entire country was devastated and there's almost no functioning economy. And so that is elevated to be this huge crime in the film. And I think by doing that, he's pointing out the absurdity of the way that our laws, sticking to the letter of the law under any circumstances are kind of absurd, but he's using children to do that. And so it really exemplifies, or like by using children instead of adults, it highlights just how absurd this is. And so I think his use of children is really smart. It's like both a way to kind of look at, hey, these are what humans are before they're corrupted, all humans. And also this is a convenient way to point out the absurdities of our culture and our laws and our system and all that. So I love it. And also, I mean, just to say it out loud, it's a hilarious idea that these boys are scheming so hard just to buy a horse.
I know.
And all they want is a horse. Why? Because they want to ride a horse. There's nothing more to it than that. But nobody can wrap their head around that. No adult can wrap their head around that. The simple joy of just wanting to have a horse to ride.
Right? I'm glad that you brought up the horse because I think the symbolism of the horse is important because it is just that they want to have a horse because they want something that's their own, that they've earned. These are children who are orphaned. They've been kind of left to fend for themselves post-war. They have no adults to take care of them. They're taking care of themselves. So for them to be able to buy this horse that they've been saving up for is incredibly important. I think something we can all relate to, even if it's not necessarily a horse, it can be anything we're saving up for. And these are children who are working. So it's hard to see that. It's hard to see children have to work to live, especially at that age. And again, in the hands of another director, this could be so heart-wrenching to the point where you're like, this is not a film I want to rewatch, but Shoeshine is one that you want to revisit. How do you feel about that? Like the idea, because I was reading there's modern discussions about this film and there's the criticism of when it came out, and some people were kind of accusing him and his other films of really trying to tug at people's heartstrings essentially and try and make them cry. I think it's not that he's trying to do that. It's just that he's tackling real things that we can all empathize with that will make you feel emotional. Just wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah. Well, the same accusations have been thrown at all of the Italian neorealists and other directors who do similar things. So when Luis Buñuel made The Young and the Damned, about 5 years later, it's a similar film about street kids in Mexico City. The middle class Mexicans were outraged. They were like, "How dare you portray us as bad people?" And he's like, "Guys, this is actually just happening right under your nose." And so these kind of things are always thrown at directors who shine a light on the underclasses, because comfortable people do not want to be reminded that those worlds exist, because then they might have to do something about it, or they at least have to choose not to do something about it. And that cognitive dissonance is too much. So yeah, I don't doubt it, but he makes it entertaining, weirdly. It's not, like I was saying, I mean, I'm a fan of social realism generally, but some of it is pretty heavy handed, like I said earlier. And he uses music, like his scores are kind of uplifting sounding. And there's other things that make it, I don't know. I'm not sure what to say, except that I don't think he's trying to like trick the viewer. I think he's just trying to tell a story about people who are typically not represented in cinema, really.
Yeah. I agree. I agree on both points. The music, again, in other films might feel like it's forcing you to feel a certain way, but I do think it's mirroring and works very well in a lot of his films. And I know that a lot of the Italian people at the time did not like the way they were portrayed in his films. And then, fast forward to now, they're considered, they're in their museums of like the most important films. That's always how it is. But, people don't like to be faced with the truth. Same with what's going on in the world right now, what continues to go on in the world. People don't want to be faced with it. So, especially when it's in your own country. And it's not like he's not, especially De Sica, is not painting anyone in a negative light. He's just, this is a mirror, this is a reflection of what's happening, and there's good and bad people out there, but he has hope, which is different than other directors might or might not have.
I agree.
Yeah. How do you feel about the ending of this film?
Well, so this is where Hollywood would never do this.
Yeah.
The ending is intense. I mean, so my read on the ending is basically like, well, should we just say what happens in the end?
Yeah, there's spoilers. It's okay.
So like you could call this a prison break film. And I set up a whole list of prison break films on Letterboxd. I'm a fan of prison break films. There's a lot. There's a canon that I'm putting together. But, the boys concoct this scheme, some of them, to escape from this juvenile detention center, boys jail. And they do. And there's so much to say about the plot, but basically the main young boy at the center of the film, Giuseppe, goes to get his horse that he had bought with his friend Pasquale, or is that how you say it? Pasquale? And, but they were at odds with each other because too many things to say, but basically he testified against him in court, being coerced by his lawyer to do so. So there's two betrayals. There's at the center, but they're at odds. And so Pasquale wants to take his revenge out on him and accidentally like knocks him off the bridge, and presumably he's dead. I mean, and so the cops show up and they've apprehended all the boys, and Giuseppe, who's this like such a tender, sweet kid throughout the whole film, tragically dies. And I think the takeaway for me is that the underclasses need to stick together and not fight amongst themselves. And that's really kind of shown here. Like he's taking his revenge out on his former best friend, and then he regrets it. He's like crying in his arms. He's holding his dead friend in his arms, crying like, why? And so I don't know. It's just a tragic reminder that meanwhile, the powers that be are untouched. They're going to go to work the next day. These underclasses are just going to keep killing each other and harming each other. And they're full of rage for good reason. And it's just sad because there's no way to harness that into, improving their lot in life. And so of course, I always have this political reading on everything, but I mean, that's their only dream was to own a horse and to be able to ride it. And I think it's important that we see the horse there at the end too. There's actually a close up of just the horse. And it's this beautiful horse that's just hanging out, like has no idea what these crazy humans are doing all around him. And it's just it's a poignant, I don't think it's sentimental. I think it's a poignant, tragic ending that really kind of drives home a lot of the themes of the film. And it's also shot at night, beautiful. They've done a recent restoration of this film, and it's kind of got film noir vibes. It's just to me, it's a powerful ending.
I know. Yeah, that restoration done by the Film Foundation, that's when I first saw it, when the Scorsese Film Foundation last year, they were showing a lot of their stuff like every month, one of them online, and Shoeshine was one of them. Got to see that. And yeah, the ending really did take me by surprise, only because when you're so used to, I mean, I've watched world cinema, especially a lot of Italian stuff, but I've watched a lot of American older films too. Like 50s and 60s is probably my favorite era. And you would never see an ending like that, especially involving children. They would never dream. It would never pass any censors.
Right.
They'd be like, absolutely not. That kid needs to open up an eye at the end to make sure we know that kid's not dead.
Well, that's what Joseph Losey said whenever he made The Lawless, only 5 years later. He's like, we could never. And if you see The Lawless, the first, I would say, 10 minutes are just straight, rip off of Italian neorealism, except it's about the Latino community in California, these farm workers. And it's wonderful. It's a good film, underrated, underseen, but it pretty soon it takes this Hollywood sort of direction. It's still a good movie. I'm just saying, like, I agree with you there that.
Yeah.
He didn't have to contend with that, though. That's what I like about De Sica but he's not making documentaries either. He's making films, and they're enjoyable.
Yep, exactly. That's the other thing where people, when they talk about neorealism, they think it's sort of just like guerrilla style filmmaking. And a lot of it sort of is like, the shot on location with a lot of non-actors, but it's still very cinematic. A lot of his films are very cinematic. He is still crafting a film and a story. So it's not like it's a pseudo documentary with script.
Not at all.
In
Not at
any
all.
sense.
I would say it's very, very influenced actually by Hollywood. I would say it's very, to me, De Sica is the bridge between Hollywood and like the really hardcore European social realism. Has a lot of elements of Hollywood. And that's why I think he's a lot more palatable to American viewers who want to dabble in social realism or Italian neorealism, even more accessible than Rossellini, I think.
100%. I love Rossellini, but De Sica is a lot easier to watch. But a few things that we've talked about in this first segment that we'll definitely touch upon again in the third segment, because his use of children and non-actors and where it was shot and the locations, we'll definitely get into that. But before that, we'll kind of shift now to his other work, because we've kind of touched upon what he's known for, what he does. So we'll get into the second segment, which is before and after. So before Shoeshine, 1945, he does The Gate of Heaven. This is a film we just briefly mentioned neither of us have seen. Some of his stuff is quite difficult to find, because right before that he did The Children Are Watching Us in 1944, which I have seen, but Gate to Heaven, I did look for this because I tried to look for every film that I haven't seen, and some of them are just really difficult, or you can only find an Italian version online and there's no subtitles, and I'm like, my Italian's not good enough for that.
Yeah.
But you were mentioning that this film was commissioned by the church?
By the Vatican. So I'm reading about it right now. So the Vatican commissioned this film as a propaganda film during the German occupation of Rome that's essentially trying to, tell the story or depict invalids traveling by train to some shrine to be healed miraculously. So I'm not sure exactly what it's about, but it's interesting that because he was a Catholic.
Yeah.
What's interesting about De Sica is he was a Catholic, but he was also a committed communist, and you don't always find those two things aligning, especially these days.
Oh yeah. No.
But anyway, yeah, so I haven't seen it, but I'm curious to see it. I would mind seeing it at some point.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind trying to find it also. It looks like it's weird because it's kind of sandwiched in between two films about children as well. Like the children are watching us right before this. And then Shoeshine, the following year, he does Heart and Soul and Bicycle Thieves in the same year, 1948, which are also, there's children involved in there. And then we see it going on and on. So The Gate of Heaven is one, would love to find it, would love to see how he approached this.
I bet we can find it. I bet if we look hard enough, we can find it.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and.
I found it with Spanish subtitles, but
Oh, okay. If anyone listening has it, feel free to give us a shout. But, then after Shoeshine, it's technically a double film, two films he did in 1 year.
Mhm.
So we've got Bicycle Thieves and Heart and Soul. So Heart and Soul also haven't seen, but that one is about a young student who's upper class, but all of his classmates are working class. I would be really interested to see that one because I think it sounds it sounds great. I'm sure the way he tackled it is great. It's a co-directed one. So I'm curious as to why that one is sandwiched in with co-direction. If it was sort of like he hopped in on a project that sounds a little bit more so maybe the situation, but there's really not that much info on the film. And then we've got Bicycle Thieves, which is, not only one of the most famous films ever, but especially probably one of the most important neorealist films. One that, at least if you've seen at least one De Sica, it's likely Bicycle Thieves. With all that information, how do you feel Shoeshine fits in between these films or within his filmography in general?
Well, I was thinking about this question earlier. I think why Bicycle Thieves is so celebrated is it has all the elements we've been talking about. It shines a light on the underclasses. It looks at children and their difficulties and uses them as kind of a vessel to interrogate all the things going on in our culture or their culture. But maybe because it involves a relationship between an older man. So he has this thing in Umberto Eco has this hapless older man. And then he sort of fuses these two things together with Bicycle Thieves. And it has such an endearing and tender and uplifting ethos or takeaway. I think that's why people just absolutely love that movie. And me included. It's just a touching, endearing, little bit of light in a despairing world. And I think that little bit of light is kind of extinguished in Shoeshine. So it's there, but it doesn't end there. It's there in moments, like it's there when they're riding their horse down the middle of the street in Rome. And it's this beautiful, hilarious moment. And it's there here and there when the boys are doing their thing, talking about their dream. But the adults and the powers that be sort of get the upper hand by the end of that movie. And maybe Bicycle Thieves kind of doesn't leave us with that lingering thought. And I think, so I think that Shoeshine is kind of a pivot point. Well, I guess I'd say Bicycle Thieves is a pivot point because Shoeshine is sort of the last of these. Well, I haven't seen the first couple of early one, but I have seen The Children Are Watching Us, which is just a brutal, intense, beautiful film. But man, it's hard
heavy.
It's heavy because you just feel bad for this kid and everybody's just indifferent to his concerns. And that's kind of a stereotype of how children were treated in the world up until recently and still are treated in places in the world. But the idea of coddling children is a new idea, I think.
Yeah.
And so that shows it pretty intensely. But I would say that, well, if you look through his filmography after that, he starts to get more levity and even more comedy. And also he has these sort of battles of the sexes films later in his filmography. So he seems to have kind of starting to move away from Italian realism basically right around this time.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mentioned this in my Miracle in Milan episode that the reason why he made that one was because he wanted to. He specifically was like, I would like to make something lighter because I've been making heavier films. Yeah. I want something that people will at least leave the theater with a smile on their face. Shoeshine, at the end of that scene, you're not smiling, but you are reflecting. But again, like we said, it's not one that you would shy away from rewatching because it's not so dark that you're like, I can never go through that again. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have asked you to do it. Again,
Yeah.
make you go through that. Yeah, I think it fits perfectly in there and leads up to something where you said, like you said, we are starting to see a slower pivot because you can only do so much of the same in quotes thing for so long. And as you get older, you probably are just like, I don't want to tackle such, heavy things all the time. So
Hmm.
you could see that shift. It's a great filmography for sure.
I still need to see a lot of his later films. I haven't seen many of these, very later films. Have you seen, the stuff?
I think the last of the if looking at the last one of his I saw was of his later stuff would be Sunflower, and
Hmm.
then I've been meaning to watch The Witches because that's the one he has like a segment in that one with other directors, but I've seen After the Fox, which was one of those like it's Peter Sellers comedies. It's interesting. He's also in it. He plays a director in it. It's funny. And then Marriage Italian Style is funny. Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow was also good. Il Boom. Also, I recently watched that one for the first time. That's another comedy. So you can
Hmm.
see he's going back to kind of his roots at his later time. Although Sunflower is not funny. Sunflower is more of a serious one with
Hmm.
Marcello and Sophia Loren. The other stuff, the later ones, though, again, they're a little harder to find. I don't know why.
Well, I think that film critics and cinephiles have probably latched on to particular ones, claimed them as the greatest ones, and enough momentum happens that they get restored or they get put on streaming platforms, and so they
Mhm.
find an audience, and then the other ones get neglected. So like
I know.
that Catholic commission film, I'm sure it's in really rough shape. I doubt there's a good print of it. And that's the way Shoeshine was for the longest time too. The one that I saw
Mhm.
first was really rough, like really low, just not a good print. And now it looks really great.
Beautiful, yeah.
I wish all of them would get restored, actually.
I know. I know, exactly. Because I think his work is so important that we can't just boil it down to, three or four. There's a
Hmm.
lot of great work he did post that peak era.
Yeah. But thankfully, some of them are streamable for sure.
Hmm.
Several of them are. So.
Yeah, they definitely are. So there's definitely of the stuff that he does have that's available, there's still a good amount for people to watch and
Hmm.
highly recommend that. Moving on from that segment, we'll go to trademarks and we have touched upon a lot of stuff, but we can expand a bit more on those ideas of the effects of everyday life on children. And like you said, the idea of actually taking children's feelings into account is quite new, but he had been tackling this in his films. And I think that was a reason why a lot of people, maybe the people of Italy, might have been offended because they don't want to be seen as treating children in a negative way. But it's like, it's not just you, it's people in
Hmm.
general, kind of being dismissive of children. He's used children a lot, and a lot, I would say almost all the children he used, this was their first performance. They never acted before. How he's able to get those performances out of children, I'll never know. These actors seem like they've been acting forever. They seem like they had been friends forever, but they didn't know each other. I wonder how you feel about these. He's known the movement, the genre of film is known for using non-actors, but the way he gets performances out of these actors, even in this film, is a feat in its own.
I agree. I'm not sure how he does it. Even the fight scenes seem real. I mean, they did a good job of, inside the jail, there's a few skirmishes and little fights, and there's these kids sitting in their cells, the main boy Giuseppe breaks down in tears more than once.
Hmm.
And all I can say is that he probably tried some of the standard things of think of the saddest thing you've ever seen. And remember, this was filmed like a year after World War II ends, and they probably all had seen atrocities in Italy and Rome, all over Italy during that
Hmm.
time, so I assume he just had them tap into real memories, but he doesn't. I mean, they all do a great job. You never feel like they're phoning it in or that they're just reading a script.
Yeah, and not at all. And I think he knows that children are imaginative and they probably do these type of performances on their own. Children like to
Yeah.
perform, whether it's for adults or within their own friend group. And I think, I mean, obviously neither of us were on set, but he obviously is very good at speaking to children. Because a lot of adults are not good at speaking to children, myself included. I mean, I have a child and I'm good at speaking to her, but to other children, I'm like, I don't know how to have a conversation with you. So it's a talent to be able to tap into that. I think there's a few directors who are able to do that, and he's definitely the top when it comes to what he's able to get out of these children because it's amazing. But, like we've been saying, this is a film that is considered near-realist, and we kind of touched upon the idea that some people view it as sort of documentary style because it is portraying real life. We're shooting on location. Sometimes there's permits or no permits involved. A lot of non-actors, people they just picked up off the street. But there is a cinematic look to this. And I was reading some discussions on it, and the idea that they turned to neorealism because they had no money wasn't true. It's more so that they wanted to make films that were a reflection of their people at the time. But they're heavily influenced by something like you mentioned, film noir. You can see elements of noir in a lot of these films, just like the themes might not be film noir, but the looks of them, especially in this one, are. Wondering how you feel about the cinematic look of this film versus his other films, because he's using obviously different cinematographers, but there's a specific look, I think, in this one.
Yeah. So he's known for his collaborations with a different cinematographer for most of his famous movies. I don't know why, but he used this other cinematographer named Anchisi Brizzi. And I think that's the only film they made together. So it's good for sure. Like, I think it's a lot of scenes are filmed either at night or indoors in a dark, these cells are like dungeon. So it's low light and the walls are dark. They're like concrete, probably dark gray concrete. And so a lot of the scenes are either these very claustrophobic spaces indoors or several in the main hall, like the main open space of the prison, and several, like you say, on location, either in the streets of Rome or at the stable where they keep their horse out in the countryside a little bit. And I mean, I think that the editing is impressive. So you've got a lot of great shots, but they're tightly edited. So it's like you move from one to the next to the next to the next in a really seamless, very good pacing. And that feels modern to me. That feels, like contemporary in a lot of ways. But yeah, the look of it is great. His other cinematographer, whose name I'm forgetting right now, is like Bicycle Thieves and Umberto D, and they're known for how beautiful they look. I mean, there's a scene, trying to think, there's a scene in this film, in Shoeshine, where you see the boys in the street and you see the cobblestones and you see every little line and every shadow. And it's just beautiful. It's one of those every frame is a painting kind of moments where it's just absolutely gorgeous. The streets of Rome, I mean, it's Rome.
Yeah.
it's just so photogenic, especially back then. And I don't know. I think the look of it is really impressive, actually. I mean, even though this is not his typical collaboration, it's not the one he's known for working with. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what else to say beyond that, but did you have more thoughts on it?
No, I'm just, I think that some people have a certain idea of neorealism and the way it looks because, this looks quite different than Bicycle Thieves, I think, because it's a different energy that he's going into with this film. So it makes sense. I think it looks cleaner than Bicycle Thieves, but that's on purpose. So he obviously chose this cinematographer for a reason. And I think it works really well. But yeah, could talk about the look of the film all day, but I think that's the crux of it there. But you did mention a lot of his films there, or especially with like a Bicycle Thieves, there is a relationship between adult and child. You see it in a lot of the films. Here, the adults, they're present, obviously, but they're all kind of seen as a threat or in a negative light. Wondering how you feel about how he presents adults in his films as it relates to this one, because even in Bicycle Thieves, the adults are painted in a specific way, or something like the children are waiting and the way they relate to children in those films is very specific, I think, and kind of heartbreaking a lot of the times. So I wonder how
Hmm.
you feel about the choice that he is making to portray the adults that way.
In Shoeshine or just any of them or
Shoeshine, but how it relates to the other adults, especially in those core films from that,
yeah.
the 40s.
Well, I think that he's trying to demonstrate that there are good people and bad people in our society, and it comes down to their values. It comes
Hmm.
down to what they value. And remember, he was a communist, so he is a fan of lifting up the working classes and essentially taking the money and power away from the ruling class, like it's and distributing it across the society. Like in Umberto D, you have this lovely old man who's been given the shaft economically
Hmm.
and he's desperate. But that lovely old man befriends this housekeeper who's basically a girl. She's a teenager. And so like you see this dynamic of like this poor, impoverished children befriending impoverished adults because they see one another as somehow equal in this unequal society. And then there's the people who have real power and that's not their friend. And so I think that dynamic plays out time and again among the children themselves and among children and adults. And that's just his values, which happen to be my own values. But
Hmm.
I think that he's just trying to demonstrate his values in those social relationships, in those relationships between children and adults. That's sort of how I see it. The children can trust an adult. They just have to be careful. They have to find the
Yeah.
right adult. They have to make sure that they're the right adult that actually has their back. And I think that's sort of what he's going for.
I mean, that's just true in general. Just because someone's an adult doesn't mean you can trust them. So
Right.
it's nice to see that for being portrayed on film by another adult who knows. I think he's questioning the morality, sorry, of people with power. And these adults are often in positions of power, especially in Shoeshine, and the way they're treating these children who, they're treating them like they're murderers. And
Hmm.
they're children who have made mistakes. And I'm sure some of them have done maybe a little bit more of serious crimes than these two boys, but these are two boys who made a mistake and they're being treated so poorly by adults who know that they can because they're bigger than them. And it's unfortunate to see, but it's just facts. It's facts of life as it is today. So
Hmm.
I do appreciate again the way he balances something so that is
Hmm.
hard to watch, but that could be even harder to watch if he was just like harsher, I think.
Yeah, the courtroom scene is a great scene because it's actually kind of funny because the adults just don't get it
Mhm.
and they're saying, "No, we really just wanted this horse." And the judge lectures him, "Well, did you sign in a contract? Did you decide which percentage was your part and which percentage was your part?" And the kid's like looking at him like, "I have no idea what you're talking about, man. We're kids."
I know.
And then the defense attorney is like giving this big speech about how these boys just were following their dreams, which is true. But it's funny because just about 5 minutes earlier, he demonstrated that he doesn't actually care about all this. He's just trying to spin this narrative to get his client off the hook. It's just funny to see that kind of dramatic irony of like, we know you don't believe the words you're saying, but actually what you're saying is true. So it's a comical, subtly comical thing. And that's what I like about De Sica is that he's finding these ways to like in a subtle way poke fun and get a little smile out of the viewer basically.
Which I think is like his main, talent and why people are
Yeah.
so happy to revisit his work over and
Yeah.
over again over the decades. Are there any other trademarks or, common themes that he often explores that you noticed in this film that you want to chat about?
Well, I just want to maybe emphasize that in this film, we don't see it quite as articulated, but that he does have this thing where he shows that caring adults kind of take children under their wings that need help. And that's
Hmm.
what you see in Two Women, which is just utterly devastating.
Yeah.
And Umberto D and other films. And in this one, I'm not sure that that's quite there yet. And maybe he got some criticism and maybe he rethought his, every film's a different approach. It's an experiment. So
Hmm.
maybe people thought he didn't have enough hope, even though I think there still is hope in the film. Maybe he felt like there wasn't enough. It was too cynical, perhaps. But he's definitely grappling with these ideas in all of these films, and I appreciate that. So that's the only. One more thing I'll say is he does use this kind of like happy-go-lucky kind of music occasionally, even in this film,
Yeah.
and that's a Hollywood kind of thing too, but you don't associate it with realism or social realism, actually. So that would say that's a feature of his that's runs through even in Two Women and some of the more devastating films. You'll have this kind of like light beat, upbeat kind of orchestral music that you don't expect to see in a movie like this. And that's something he keeps doing.
I notice it especially it's throughout, but in the opening scene when the kids are on the horse, and it
Hmm.
does kind of set you up a little bit, especially if this was like the first one, De Sica, you'd be like, oh, this is a nice film about two kids with a horse, and you're like, it's not where it's going, but well, it's still a horse involved, but towards the end, but it is interesting that balance because again, I think if there wasn't a solid film behind it, you would be like, what's the deal with the music and the tone of this film? So again, he's obviously making deliberate decisions that often pay off.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that was Shoeshine. I think we're going to still talk about it because I still have one more question for you before I let you go. But I think that this is a film that I would say we both agree should be discussed a bit more because I think it's up there with, Bicycle Thieves and Umberto D, especially now with that new restoration. Hopefully it gets more eyes on it and a physical release.
I wish that Criterion would add it to their streaming collection.
I hope so. I feel like they might be doing a collaboration at some point with the Film Foundation. That's my guess. Or maybe I'm just like, overly optimistic about it. But I think the more stuff that comes out, especially, I mean, Criterion's obviously a big name. So whenever they put stuff out, it gets people to discover other works of
Hmm.
theirs. Because I often talk about The Secret to people and they're like, oh yeah, I've seen Bicycle Thieves, but I haven't actually gone to see the other stuff outside of that and maybe Umberto D. So hoping that they seek out the other stuff because it's like a gold mine.
He's not a one-hit wonder. Don't think of him
Absolutely
as a
not.
one-hit wonder.
No, it's got a lot of bangers in that filmography for sure. But my last question for you is for the closing thoughts, double bill. So if you were going to pair this film with another film or films, if you have more than one option, what would you pair it with and why?
This is a hard question, but I gave it some thought. And, I had already mentioned The Young and the Damned, which I think is a
Hmm.
great Buñuel film. But, let me just say before I answer this question that he obviously established a whole new kind of film, right? Like there's a lot of things that came after this that are trying to do a similar thing, which are looking at street kids who are struggling, who are trying to live, and the system is crushing them. Young and the Dam would be one. 400 Blows by Truffaut would be one. There's all these films that
Hmm.
came after that. There's a bunch by the Dardenne brothers, The Kid with the Bike, and so on and so forth. But I was thinking about one that, because all of those movies are really despairing, right? All of those
Hmm.
movies are lacking in hope, actually. And the one that I would pair this up, well, let me just put a plug in for a very overlooked movie. It's called Boot Polish, also about two shoeshine boys. It's an underseen Bollywood film from 1954, directed by Prakash Arora. And it's called
Okay.
Boot Polish. Just obviously very indebted to this film. But the movie that I would pair it up with is Abbas Kiarostami's film Where's Friend's House, which is
Yeah.
just like honestly probably a top 10 movie for me. Like
Yeah.
an utter masterpiece. It's the first of what they call the Coker trilogy. And it's just about a boy who is trying to help his friend who needs his homework before he gets in trouble. So it's showing just this innocent boy just doing something that in his mind is like a no brainer. Like, I need to help my friend. But remember, the adults are like, you can't just do things on your own. You have to
Mhm.
obey our rules. You can't go out into town and do this stuff. And it's just, have you seen Where's the Friend's House?
It's on my list to get
Yeah.
through. It's
So
work.
you have to see this movie.
I know.
It's so beautiful. It's so I would pair it up with that. It's just an absolute brilliant, beautiful. The whole trilogy is great, but the first one is just wonderful. And so I would screen first Shoeshine, which kind of interrogates the way that children are treated in the world and shows how they can accidentally just get caught up in crime. Not a huge deal, but it's treated like it's a huge deal.
Mhm.
And it leaves you with a kind of a downer feeling, but then you can see a wonderful kind of positive kind of exploration of that same childhood innocence in a little bit less oppressive society. It's in Iran in the 80s, but it's a less oppressive society with these children. And it's just kind of a window into a kid's mindset. And it's just a genius film. And I'm pretty sure that's on Criterion. That's a
I
celebrated
think so.
film. Yeah. So Kiarostami would be, to me, Kiarostami is the obvious heir to De Sica because
Hmm.
a lot of his movies are about children or they're about the dynamic between adults and children. A lot of them are about the working class people, but it's set in Iran. It's in Tehran and other parts of Iran. So it's a whole different social context, but he also retains a lot of hope. And I love his stuff.
No, I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's been on my list for so long. So this is my push to finally watch it. I think I read the synopsis and I was like, oh man, is this gonna be sad? And I can handle sad, but some days you're like, maybe not today. It might be tomorrow when I watch the sad one. But I am definitely going to bump that up because it does
Nice.
sound like it's perfect pairing for this. And the other one that you mentioned, Boot Polish as well. That sounds very good. I definitely want to watch that.
Harder to find, but I think it's on YouTube probably.
Okay.
My wife is a Bollywood film scholar, so she's
Hmm.
always putting obscure Bollywood films. I say Bollywood, what I mean is Hindi language films from India. Like,
Hmm.
you know, this is from 1954, so it's an
Oh,
early
wow.
it's just a few years after, well, 8 years after Shoeshine came out, but it's also
Hmm.
about two Shoeshine boys trying to survive I believe it's in Calcutta. It might be Mumbai, one of the two. It's probably Mumbai.
Okay. No, that sounds great. I definitely need to brush up on more Hindi language films for sure. And I'm always excited to get a recommendation on a film. So I'll definitely seek that one out. And all
Right.
that info will be in the show notes for the listeners as well. So, there'll be a reference point of the film name and the director. So you can seek it out as well. I thought about this one too, and there's a couple that came to mind. I think the one that I would stick with because I think this director also has a very good hand at dealing with children, which would be Yasujito Ozu. I think he's
Mm,
very good at portraying the lives of children in an honest way. Again, a more hopeful side as well, like De Sica. And I thought of
hmm
um, one of his early ones, Silence, actually called I Was Born But. This is 1932, but it's actually a silent film because he continued doing silent films for a little longer than most people did at that era. But it's about two young brothers who just don't want to go to school. And they get, in some trouble with their parents, and the way their parents deal with them is interesting because you can see two parents are just stressed. They're stressed as being parents, they're financially stressed, and they're taking it out in a way that a lot of parents would on their children of just being like, I can't deal with you, just go do your own stuff. And, it's not a violent way. It's more so like, you guys have each other, you deal with each other. So the way the two boys are in this film is quite similar to the way the boys are in Shoeshine, except they're brothers. So they're a little closer than two friends would be. But the two boys in Shoeshine, they could be brothers. If they had set
hmm
them up as brothers, no one would question it. So I like that. If you want something that's also, there's no spoilers for I Was Born, but it's not a dark ending. Like Shoeshine. And then the other one, for some reason, that came up in my mind, and I feel weird recommending this movie because I genuinely don't like watching this movie. But I thought of the way children are dealt with in films and the way adults treat them and mistreat them in a way that's like verbally abusive. A lot of times it can be physically abusive in a way, and how certain directors tackle it in a way that is harsher and harder to watch. So for some reason, I thought of Welcome to the Dollhouse,
Oh, wow.
Todd Solondz. And I don't like recommending that movie. I know it's a film that people love, but I watched it once. It scarred me, and I never want to watch it again because I just did not like the way her character was treated. And I know it was a point to make in that film, but it's hard to watch. So if you're up for it and you want to watch something that's darker, you could do that. But again, don't blame me if it ruins your day.
I haven't seen that movie in over 20 years. I forgot about that movie, actually.
I try to be honest. Todd Solondz is, I have a lot to say about him. I know he's
Yeah.
important, but he's the opposite of De Sica,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think Ozu is a great suggestion, and I actually haven't seen that one yet. I need to.
It's on the channel, Criterion channel, so it's good.
But his movie Good Morning is also about two
Mhm.
boys. That's a good. I have seen that one. That's a good movie.
That's a good one that would be paired. I think it's I Was Born But and Good Morning are essentially the same film,
Oh, okay. Okay.
for lack of a better word. One's just silent. Good Morning, I've also seen it. It's great. So you could pick one or the other, depending if you're like, well, I want to watch something in color, so do Good Morning.
I'm working on a letterboxed list on a children's canon, my own personal children's canon. And there's so many movies about children that are good, and there's a lot of them that aren't good, actually. But the ones that are good are just great to watch because it really does remind you of what our cultural values are. And they use children to demonstrate that. And it's
Yeah.
a great choice for a filmmaker. I'm into that kind of thing.
Well, I'd be interested to see the list once you. I mean, I guess it's an ongoing list of
Yeah, I'll work on it.
films that, yeah. Jason, thank you so much for joining. This is a great discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time, and all just like the historical background and stuff was very informative, and I think the listeners will appreciate it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on. I love nerding out talking about movies.
So do I. Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode on Umberto D. Watch more movies, and I'll see you next time.